Saying good morning to our listeners, those of you via Classic Radio 105.5, 105.9. Good Monday morning. It's the 27th day of November for the year 2023. Good morning to you, especially also to our viewers via GBN TV, whether it's Channel 7, Channel 11 or Channel 20. Good morning. Those of you via social media platforms, whether it's the Facebook page, YouTube channels, good morning and welcome. And I'll seem to not mention you folks, especially those of you via GBN's webpage, gbn.gd. Good morning to you. And thanks for being with us this morning. It's to the point for today, Monday, the 27th. With me this morning, folks, I have Mr. Herbert Samuel, and he's the project coordinator of geothermal energy here in Grenada, and of course being part of the Ministry of Climate Resilience, the Environment and Renewable Energy. Let me say good morning to Mr. Samuel. Good morning to you, sir, and welcome.
Good morning. Good morning, GT. Good morning, Grenada.
How are you doing this morning, sir? How are you doing this morning?
Doing fine, thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right. Our conversation this morning will be based on geothermal energy. And we have always heard the conversation in Grenada, about geothermal and so forth. If we could get the ball rolling in terms of the conversation this morning, what is geothermal energy? Maybe there's a lot of Grenadians who are viewing and listening to us this morning and asking themselves, I've heard people talking about geothermal. What is geothermal energy?
Right. Well, it's the ideal place to start the discussion. Thank you for that question. Literally, if you look at the word geothermal, you can break it into two parts. Geo meaning earth, and thermal having to do with heat. So geothermal energy literally is the heat of the earth.
Okay.
Right. Now, if you remember your science classes, I don't know when last you were in a science class.
That's a long time ago.
At some point in time, you were in school, primary school, secondary school. You learned that the structure of the earth includes a core, a solid core, at the center of the earth. And that core is at a temperature of about 6,000 degrees Celsius, which is the exact temperature of the surface of the sun.
Yes.
It's very hot.
All right.
So this heat essentially permeates the entire earth. It rises to the surface as heat does, and in some areas as it gets closer to the surface, it manifests itself in ways that allow us to be able to tap into naturally occurring pockets or bodies of water deep underground.
Okay.
And these bodies of water, we'll talk a little bit more about it a little later, but these bodies of water are referred to as geothermal reservoirs. And if you imagine Grand Etang Lake, which is a lake on the surface, it's surface water. It is a lake that manifests on the surface. There are large bodies of water trapped in layers of permeable rock underground, all over the world.
All right.
And in areas where geothermal energy is likely to be viable, what is happening is that beneath those trapped lakes of water underground, there's heat coming up. And that heat is, somewhere in the region of 200 to 300 degrees Celsius. So what that means is the water that is trapped in these layers is actually steam.
Yes.
But because it's trapped and it's under pressure, it remains in the liquid state because it's under pressure. But if we are able to, the basic concept of geothermal energy for power generation is if we are able to locate these underground geothermal reservoirs, tap into them by drilling a well. The term well, sometimes people might think it's a well that's several feet across.
Yes.
Like
a regular well with water and so forth.
A geothermal well is measured in inches.
Okay.
So we drill a well that is about 9 inches diameter at the bottom of the well, into that geothermal reservoir, and that trapped water, which is heated and under pressure, it comes up as steam, and that steam we use to run a steam turbine, which turns a generator which produces electricity. So that's the basic idea. Basic idea is it's heat of the earth naturally occurring, and we are simply attempting to locate it and tap into it for the benefit of the country.
If I had to ask another question on the same direction which you're going, how does the geothermal heat get to the interior of the Earth's surface?
Right, so it starts in the interior.
Yeah.
The core of the Earth. Okay, the Earth is a big ball.
Yeah.
Right. And that ball is not a homogeneous ball all the way through. There's a core at the center, which is a solid mass of rock, metal, and that mass, that core, is actually an ongoing, infinite, perpetual nuclear reactor. So there are nuclear reactions occurring in the core constantly. Those nuclear reactions generate heat, and heat rises. You see?
Right.
So that heat rises through the various layers of the earth, through the mantle, the lower mantle, the upper mantle, all the way up to the crust, which is where we are. And as I mentioned before, if that heat occurs in areas where underground water at the specific depths, if those two things coincide, then that underground water is able to be used to produce geothermal steam.
Right.
So it's an entirely natural, ongoing process that has been going on for millions of years, basically the age of the earth.
So is geothermal energy renewable? Is a renewable source?
Yes, by definition, because the heat is, to all extents and purposes, infinite. Once an earth exists, there will be geothermal heat, because the core of the earth will continue to produce heat. That heat continues to rise. If we are able to access the heat, we have a never-ending source of heat which can provide steam to produce work and generate electricity in a power station.
All right. As you in the firm of electricity and powering and stuff like that, my next question leads to that also. How is geothermal electricity actually produced?
Right. So the only unusual part of the whole scenario is let's call it the fuel source for the time being, right? Think about a regular diesel power station. Think about Queen's Park.
Yes.
Right. There are generators at Queen's Park. There are diesel engines at Queen's Park. The diesel engine uses diesel fuel to turn the generator, which produces the electricity.
Yes.
Right. So in a geothermal power station, what would happen is you take away the diesel generator, you put that outside.
Yep.
You put that aside, and you replace that with a steam turbine, which is another form of generating equipment.
Yes.
Steam turbines are in use all over the world. They use pressurized steam to turn them. That's the fuel. But in a non-geothermal setting, that pressurized steam has to come from basically a boiler, right? So something has to heat water to provide that steam to turn that steam turbine. But in a geothermal power plant, that hot steam, that hot pressurized steam is coming up out of a hole in the ground.
Naturally.
Yes. We just have to find the location, drill into it, and that steam is going to be coming up out of that hole in the ground. And that's what powers the power station.
All right.
And then when the steam is used in the turbine, it condenses to a liquid, and that liquid is re-injected into the reservoir at another location, so that you have a continuous replenishment of the water that you took out in the first place.
Okay. We have recycling it to a point.
Exactly. So it's sustainable, it's renewable, it's entirely natural. The fuel is hot pressurized steam coming up from underground.
All right. Tell me, do geothermal, as we talk in terms of the power consumption in driving electricity and so forth, is a power plant produces emission that leads to global warming from that? If we could ask that question.
Power plants generally do, yes.
Yes.
Going back to
in the sense of geothermal now, would that produces any emissions or sort like of that nature?
The emissions are negligible.
Yeah.
They're trending towards zero. Think about how a power plant produces emissions. It produces emissions. A conventional power plant that burns diesel produces emissions due to the fact that they're burning diesel fuel. If you look at a diesel truck going up the hill, depending on the state of maintenance of the truck, you're actually seeing the emissions coming out of the tailpipe.
So true.
Right? So it's the same thing. There's a combustion of a fuel. The fuel contains carbon, and the combustion process releases energy and carbon, so that carbon goes into the atmosphere. A geothermal plant does not have these components. It's steam coming up out of the ground. Nothing is being burnt. The emissions that might be associated with a geothermal power plant have to do with the fact that some geothermal wells, depending on the location, may themselves contain very small amounts of hydrogen sulfide, a little bit of carbon dioxide, very small amounts, and some other chemicals that exist naturally underground. So some of these will come to the surface during the process.
Right.
But if you compare that to a diesel power station, it's negligible. It's practically zero.
Interesting to know that. What are the advantages of geothermal energy? What are the advantages?
As we mentioned before, so we have no emissions in a practical sense. We have a fuel that once you find it, remember the fuel is the steam coming up out of the ground. The fuel is free.
Yeah.
It's a free fuel.
Mm-hmm.
So all of the money now that is being spent on importing diesel, the boat comes into the bay every 5 or 6 days, spends a couple of days there to fill the tanks at Glen. That fuel is diesel that Glen has to use foreign exchange to pay for. That money, the cost of that fuel, comes directly to consumers on our electricity bills. So imagine if we were able to generate electricity without using that diesel fuel. Imagine if we were able to generate electricity using a fuel that is actually free. That gives you an idea of one of the main benefits of this. And, the renewable nature of the thing is that if we are successful in this endeavor, we don't have to rely on imported anything. We have an indigenous, locally occurring fuel source that has an indefinite lifespan. It's going to outlast all of us. So these are some of the benefits of having geothermal energy at a power sector level for a country like Grenada.
All right, interesting to know that. I just want to go back a wee bit. You mentioned it to a point, but maybe I didn't grasp it enough. Does geothermal energy come in types?
Types?
Yeah.
It's an interesting question. There are types of technology that allow you to utilize the geothermal source that you actually have.
All right.
So, for example, let's say we drilled the exploration wells. We'll talk a little bit more about the project itself in a while. What we're doing now is we are in the exploration phase.
All right.
So we are looking to drill some wells, 2 wells, that will allow us to confirm whether we have a viable geothermal source that can support utility scale power generation. Right. Now that source is essentially, it has to have certain characteristics, but the main characteristics would be temperature of the water in the reservoir.
Yes.
And it has to flow. There has to be pressure for it to flow up through the well. And some wells are going to be hotter than others for geological reasons. The location of the well, the depth of the location of the reservoir, the depth of the reservoir, how distant the reservoir itself is from the source that is heating it from underground, and so on. So if you have a well that is of a relatively high temperature, let's say 250 degrees Celsius, if you have a reservoir that's at that temperature, the technology that you use to build a power station on top of that is relatively straightforward, because the more heat you have, the more energy you have, the more options you have to be able to extract that energy. If you have, on the other hand, a reservoir that may be 140 degrees Celsius, that's the temperature of the water in the reservoir.
Yes.
It's still above boiling point, but it's not that hot. So to extract the energy from that reservoir, to use it in a power station, you're going to have to design the power station a little bit differently to be able to get maximum output from the steam that is of that temperature. So there are different technology approaches to designing power stations to extract the energy. But that's really about it. And these are well-known technologies that once we have an idea of what the characteristics of the source is, we can move to that step.
All right. We do for a break and we come back. When we come back, I want us to discuss about, of course, geothermal here in Grenada. Let's get a little bit some information on that when we come back after the break. Stay with us, folks. Hey, folks, stay with us. It's Classic Radio here on This Morning and GBN TV. We're to the point. We've taken a break, folks. We'll be right back talking to Mr. Samuel this morning, and we're talking geothermal. We'll be right back after the break.
Plug into Digicel Plus and get even more entertainment with Disney Plus included. The best of Disney, Pixar, Marvel, Star Wars, and National Geographic all in one place. Whenever you want, plug into Plus to enjoy Disney Plus and much more with a home fiber bundle. Sign up today. Digicel Plus.
Like family, it's always exciting when lottery players get together. Now the lottery games are joining in the fun. Check out the multiplier family of Instacash games. 5 times the cash at $2, 10 times the cash at $3, and 20 times the cash at $5. On your tickets, match any of our numbers with any of the winning numbers and win the prize below that number. There's more. Multiply your winnings up to 5 times, 10 times, or 20 times more. Winning is easy. Play Monday to Sunday. There are no draws to wait on. Win instantly. It's the multiplier family of Instacash games with over $675,000 to be won instantly. Don't just buy one, buy all, because family is everything. Must be 18 years and older to play. NLA, making family dreams come true.
Hello everyone, here is an invitation to join me this and every Sunday until December 17th on GBN Television and K105 FM from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. for Yuletide Sundays. Great music, gifts, and all the wonderful things of Christmas. Yuletide Sundays comes to you compliments Hubbard's, quality service, affordable prices, Grenville Credit Union, Gittins Healthcare, and Clear Vision Eye Center.
Records at the traffic department shows that a total of 1,447 accidents were reported for the year 2012, which includes 3 road fatalities. 2,946 accidents were reported for the year 2022, which includes 8 road fatalities. This is a significant increase of 104%. This is alarming.
Welcome back, viewers. Welcome back, listeners. It's to the point for today, Monday, the 27th of November. With me this morning is Mr. Herbert Samuel. He's the project coordinator for geothermal energy, and he's with the Ministry of Climate Resilience, the Environment, and Renewable Energy. Welcome back, Mr. Samuel. Our next foremost question, I did mention that, of course, before the break. We want to talk about geothermal here in Grenada.
Right.
What's the process of geothermal in Grenada? How is things going along with geothermal? Do we have geothermal here in Grenada? Are we able to obtain geothermal energy here in Grenada, if the questions could go along that direction?
Sure. So, to give you the backstory, what happened is that in 2014, the government of Grenada requested technical assistance from the governments of Japan and New Zealand to commence an exploration for geothermal energy in Grenada, because geothermal energy, although it is new, the idea is new to Grenada, it's new to Grenadians. The idea of geothermal energy in the region is not new. It goes back decades. There have been explorations of one type or another that have been taking place in the Caribbean since the 1960s and 70s.
Okay.
So in 2014, Government of Grenada requested formal technical support from New Zealand and Japan to look into the question: is there geothermal energy in Grenada, and can it be used for power generation purposes? Why Japan and New Zealand? Because New Zealand is one of the global leaders in geothermal energy. There are 13 geothermal power stations in New Zealand. Yeah. New Zealand is an island. It's a lot bigger than Grenada, but it's an island. And they have been operating geothermal energy power stations since 1958. And there are 13 of them now powering, the economy. Japan also has significant geothermal installations. Japan's power system is more varied. They've got nuclear power over there as well. I'm not sure if they're still using it, but geothermal is one of the components of Japan's power system. So these countries were requested to help us. Yes. And what they did was they commenced a program of preliminary surface-based investigations on Grenada to determine if there was any potential. All right. Think about preliminary surface-based investigations as a kind of an ultrasound. We're all familiar with ultrasound.
Yes.
Right? So you're basically staying on the surface and you're using instruments on the surface of the earth to probe to get a picture of what's on the ground. That was done during 2015, 2016. And the results of that preliminary investigation suggested that, yes, there is potential for Grenada to utilize geothermal energy that's located in the north of the island to generate power. All right. So that was the first step of the process. The second step of the process is that potential which is indicated, it has to be confirmed. And the only way that you can actually confirm that you have a viable geothermal power source is if you drill into it.
Okay.
If you find it and you drill into it and you see the steam coming up, you check the temperature, you see the steam flowing at pressure, you measure the volume that you're able to get, then that will tell you that, yes, you can build a power station on top of this.
All right.
So where we are now is we are in the preparatory stages of preparing to drill 2 exploration wells to take that next step.
All right. Interesting to know. A start time for that, if anytime soon?
Well, let me tell you a little bit more about the wells and the locations and so on, because, that's important.
Yes.
We are the surface-based, let's just call it the ultrasound, right?
Okay.
The ultrasound gave us a list of about 7 potential sites in the north of the island, in the vicinity surrounding Mount St. Catherine.
All right.
And those sites, through a process of analysis of costs and so on, were narrowed down to 3. And based on budgetary constraints, that 3 was narrowed down to 2.
Oh, yeah.
So we're now looking at drilling at 2 sites, one in St. John and one in St. Patrick.
Oh, yeah.
I mentioned budget constraints, and we definitely will speak about budget matters a little bit later, but one of the important things to note at this point in time, perhaps the most important thing to note at this point in time, and this goes back to the Caribbean scope of geothermal energy. What we're doing now on this project is financed by grant money provided by the Caribbean Development Bank as part of their regional program to support geothermal exploration in the region. So as we speak, there is geothermal exploration and development and project development going on in several islands in the Caribbean.
Okay.
There's Dominica, which is at an advanced stage of its process. There's Nevis, also advanced. There's St. Lucia. There was St. Vincent. These were all supported by CDB funding. Montserrat is doing geothermal exploration as well. Not supported by CDB, I don't think, because Montserrat is a British overseas territory. So they're supported by UK, funding. But there's half a dozen geothermal projects at one stage or the other of development ongoing in the Caribbean as we speak.
Right. So is there any country with this, just a slight bit, is there any country in the Caribbean that's actually using geothermal energy right now?
Right. I was hoping you would ask that question. There is a location about 300 miles north of where we are, where there is a 15 megawatt geothermal power plant operating as we speak. It's been operating since 2005. It was originally commissioned in 1986 with 5 megawatts of capacity. That was extended by another 10 megawatts to 15 megawatts in 2005. This is in a village called Buyante in Guadeloupe.
Okay.
It's a coastal town. The population of Buyante is about 7,500 people. So, it's about twice the size of Guave. The power station is 100 meters from the waterfront. It's a 15 megawatt power station, and just by coincidence, the project that we're looking at here in Grenada, our plan, based on the preliminary investigations, based on the ultrasound, our plan is to develop exactly that size of power plant here in Grenada. 15 megawatts, which, if it is successful, will produce electricity on the order of about 40% of Grenada's current electricity use. And that 40% of electricity currently being used is essentially household electricity use.
Okay.
So, in other words, if we were able to build a 15 megawatt geothermal power station right now, if it appeared tomorrow, it would power every single household in Grenada.
Which could certainly be a reduction in cost for users.
So
true.
We
talking cost. How expensive, or is it, if I could use the word expensive, to get a geothermal, from the as you start from the ultra trunk stage to the actual drilling and finding those heat source,
right,
to develop in the plant. What is the cost factor of that range for that?
It is the capital cost, which is what you're talking about.
Yes.
The amount of money that you have to spend to set the project up and get it to the point where it begins to operate tomorrow.
Yes.
That capital cost is quite high.
Yeah.
It's high for good reason. The process of locating and confirming geothermal energy is fairly risky because of the nature of the resource. You're not ever quite sure, based on the ultrasound, that you're going to be drilling in the right place to get the best steam output of the plant. Unless, of course, you're in a place like Iceland. In Europe, Iceland is 95% powered by renewables, and most of that appears to be geothermal energy. But there's also Dominica. Dominica has been exploring geothermal energy since about 2008. And Dominica has had excellent results with their exploration. So right now, they're at a point where they're now seeking funding to build a power station. But it's typically a long, relatively expensive journey. But if you get to the end of the journey and you manage to build that power station, you have a source of fuel that is free into perpetuity. And, geothermal power plants have been operating in the world for 60 years. So it's really a question of maintaining your steam field, maintaining your reservoir, as we mentioned earlier, making sure the water is recycled and all of that. This is naturally occurring water that ends up in the ground in the first place due to the natural global water cycle. In other words, it rains.
Yes.
Rainwater ends up underground. Water from the oceans percolates into the ground. So we look out and we see lakes, we see the sea. These are visible surface manifestations of water that are natural. We see the clouds, which is water in another form. Underground, there are these natural manifestations of water as well. And the quantity of water on the globe, on a global scale, is essentially fixed. That water is just distributed, differently in different areas. But I say that to make the point that geothermal energy, as we understand it now, is just as likely to be around in the future as solar energy. Because, we all expect that the sun will always be shining once we're alive. And if the sun stops shining, then we'll be dead.
So true.
But the same thing really applies to geothermal in terms of what produces it. There's heat, there's water, and these resources are going to be with us on the earth as long as the earth exists. These things are just not distributed as evenly as sunlight is. So there's some technical challenges, but it is mature technology. There are over 400 geothermal power stations operating all over the world, producing an amount of electricity that is about 500 times the amount of electricity that Grenada would use. This is the scale of geothermal energy power generation that exists in the world today.
All right. A question I was going to ask, but you did answer it somewhere, because I was actually going to ask how long does the geothermal resource actually last? But you answered it somewhere the other in between there. So we do for another break. We come back to our listeners and viewers. If you do have a question or two you may like to ask Mr. Samuel, feel free to do so in our next segment. But we come back with more on the conversation this morning. We're talking geothermal. Stay with us here on To The Point. We'll be right back.
Grenada, as we celebrate 50 years of independence.
I want to control your anger. There's a way to feel better. That's one thing to remember. No matter where you are, you can be a star. Stop and take a deep breath and relax yourself. Take another deep breath and relax it, and relax it. Eliminate violence. We say, yeah, GBN we say, arts and culture living, yeah. Rock the box we say, I'm telling you, rock the box, rock the box, rock the box we say, I'm telling you, rock the box, rock the box, rock the box we say, we'll be jamming here on a Thursday. It's a
There are now 5, 10, 15-year survivors, even with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. So if someone tells you just get your affairs in order and don't do anything, that's a mistake.
We need families who've been devastated by this disease to get on board so we can get more research and get to the cure.
Join us on Caribbean Medical TV right here on this station.
Feel good tax.
Remember, if you have flu symptoms, do the right thing and stay at home to avoid giving it to others. Remember, you can be infectious up to a week after developing symptoms, so rest up and take it easy.
Feel good facts.
Help prevent cold and flu by washing your hands with soap and water for at least 20 seconds. That's the time it takes to remove most germs. No soap and water? No worries when you've got alcohol-based hand sanitizer.
Welcome back, listeners. Welcome back, viewers. It's To The Point here on Classic Radio, GBN TV, for today, Monday, the 27th. Speaking this morning with Mr. Herbert Samuel, the project coordinator for geothermal energy. And we of course, did mention that if there are callers and there are viewers out there, say, and listeners who would like to, of course, ask a question or two to Mr. Samuel relating to, of course, geothermal energy, feel free. We do have a first caller. Let's go to the phone line and see what this caller has to contribute. Caller, good morning.
Good morning,
welcome.
Mr. Telesford. How are you?
Doing good, sir. What about you?
Great. I'm quite all right, thank you, Mr. Samuel. First, let me say, Mr. Samuel, I do commend you on your approach, your rather professional, pedagogic, in other words, your manner of expressing yourself as relating to the dissemination of the information you are sharing with us. I congratulate you there. And I like things when they're properly said, you know. Wouldn't you accept it, sir? You can't hear me, doesn't seem, but anyway, let's go. My question is, I do appreciate that to get this thing going, the production of geothermal energy and so on for its consequent production of electricity is a very costly exercise, as I reckon with all the other alternatives. Question therefore, have any other studies been done with the other formats, for example, wind, solar? Have any other studies, comparative studies, should I say, been done here in Grenada so that we can come to a final decision of which will be more economical for us in the future? Trust my question is understood. Thank you very much, sir.
Yep. Contribution to the callers?
Yes, sir. Thank you for that. First of all, for your kind comments at the start and for the very pertinent question. I'm sorry I didn't get his name.
His name is usually Mr. Rollo. We could I think you wouldn't mind going by that.
Okay. So, yes, sir. Thank you for the question. What one has to understand about the development of renewable energy in a place like Grenada, and this applies to the Eastern Caribbean, the Caribbean region, and so on, is that yes, as you mentioned, there are other competing technologies for the production of renewable energy that are also viable. Yes, you mentioned wind, there is solar. Just to take those two examples, these are fairly common in the region when we think of renewable energy. But what it is important to do as planners and the folks who are responsible for actually making this happen is to first of all understand that there is no one magic bullet technology, right? That magic bullet technology doesn't yet exist. It may exist in the future, but as far as we know now, it does not exist. So what we have to do as planners responsible for developing the renewable energy future, for enabling the transformation of Grenada's economy and Caribbean economies to renewables, is to take a portfolio approach to the development of renewable energy. And all that means is really to say that there are different renewable technologies that can be brought together to provide the overall outcome that we seek, which is to move Grenada from 3% of renewable energy now, as far as electricity is concerned. It's a surprisingly small figure, but it's fairly common across the region. About 3% of Grenada's electricity sector is based on renewables. And the vision is to move that to almost full penetration of renewable energy. And to be able to do that, you have to have several components in place. And one of those components, in places where geothermal energy is a possibility, is to exhaust all possibilities to determine whether you can use geothermal energy or not. Guadeloupe is using geothermal energy since the 1980s, and they upgraded their power station to 15 megawatts in 2005. They are currently planning to add another 100 megawatts of capacity to that installation in Guadeloupe. So right now, that power station is providing about 6% of the electricity that is used in Guadeloupe. Guadeloupe is 4 times the size of Grenada, and they're going to add another 100 megawatts of power to their geothermal power system. Okay. So, that tells you a story about the value of geothermal in the scheme of things. What it does is it provides a base load of power. It allows you to eliminate a huge chunk, let's use that term, of diesel generation. It removes the fuel costs associated with all of that diesel generation, and that allows you to then expand your energy portfolio by adding solar PV on top of that, adding battery storage for the solar PV installations, and on top of that, to get to the top of the demand, it's in technical terms, it's called the peak demand. You add whatever else you need to add to service the particular demand on any given day, which could be a little bit of diesel, but as things develop, it's more likely to be some rooftop solar and some other things. So the point is, there's a mix of technologies that build up in layers to service the requirement for electricity, but it services all of that with renewable energy of one form or another. I hope that answers the question.
Okay, we do have another caller. Caller, good morning, welcome.
Good morning, GT, and good morning, Mr. Samuel. Mr. Samuel will be very aware of who I am. There's something called the precautionary principle. But before that, I want to commend the first caller for some of the questions he had, because I think there lies the problem. We are jumping into an area that presents so much risk that if anything is not go wrong, if anything wrong, probably the whole island will be doing. Let me say that there's something called the precautionary principle, which basically says if you're not sure what will happen, you should stay clear of it. I'm just paraphrasing the whole thing, simplifying it. And this thing, based on even some of the conversations I've had with Mr. Samuel and folks from New Zealand and with other colleagues from here, it's very clear. There is a gamble we are about. We ask questions about the water, the use of water, the effect on the ecosystems around. These questions cannot be answered. And also, the fact is that we could look for energy in other alternative source. Now, of course, we are told, and it is indeed a fact, that it's a renewable energy. But at what cost? At what dislocation of people, affecting their property and whatever. Too many risks. And for this reason, I want to put on record again, regardless of the administration as I have done, and my organization have done, we oppose geothermal in Grenada at this time. It is can. We did it in the first NDC in 2008, did it under the NMP, and we're doing it this time again. No geothermal in Grenada at this time. Let's go solar, let's go wind, let's go wave, whatever. Geothermal is too risky. I want it to be recorded that if any damage comes along and people will know, that people like myself warned against that. Some people, business for some people. This is not for us. Good morning, thanks.
Thank you, caller. Thank you so much for your, of course, comment this morning. And it goes back to what the caller speaker, our question that I wanted to ask, what are the environmental effects of geothermal? You could answer my question along with referring back to the caller.
Right. Yes, so caller, thank you for your contribution. I'd like to mention or refer to two of the things that you mentioned, because you did mention quite a few things, but let's just talk about two things. One, you mentioned the precautionary principle. It's important to understand that the precautionary principle refers to innovations, and it refers to the risks associated with innovations where the likely outcomes of those innovations are unknown. So let's take an example of what such an innovation could be right now in November 2023. A year ago, a company called OpenAI, Silicon Valley, released a software program called ChatGPT. We've all heard of it. Have you? GT?
I have heard of it.
ChatGPT is a precursor to what is referred to as artificial general intelligence, or AI, AGI. Nobody has the slightest idea where this is heading, Even the experts who are building AI, if you listen to some of them speak, they themselves do not actually know where this is going to go, where it is going to end up. The precautionary principle applies there because it is the reason why the precautionary principle was developed in the first place. It involves innovations where potential outcomes are unknown and there are risks and outcomes that nobody has any actual clue about. So yes, the precautionary principle would be perfectly applied in the situation that humanity finds itself in now. This is not at all the case with geothermal energy, caller. If you were listening to what I said earlier, and if you heard what I said earlier about geothermal energy use and utilization across the globe, this goes back to the 1960s, thereabouts. Let's call it 1960 as a round number, right? So we're talking about a situation where a technology has been in use all across the globe in various types of locations, in island locations as well as in continental locations for the past 60-something years. This is not an innovation where the risks and outcomes are unknown. This is not at all the case. So I put it to you that your invocation of the precautionary principle is interesting, but is probably not quite correct. I also wanted to mention the thing that you said, which is that you've asked questions about water and so on, and these questions cannot be answered. This is a mischaracterization of what has actually happened, sir, at least where I was present. Questions have been asked about water, and the questions can be answered. And I would point you to the draft environmental and social impact assessment for this exploration project, which has recently been published, which includes an entire chapter on water and water resources. That chapter runs to 132 pages or thereabouts, and it contains copious details about the intersection of water resources and the geothermal project as it is being proposed in Grenada. So it's not really fair to say that you're asking questions that can't be answered. I get your point. I get that your final statement is that you oppose geothermal energy, and that is entirely your prerogative. But I would hope that listeners understand that we are not barging ahead regardless of environmental and social issues. We didn't have time to speak about this, but we are fully required by the CDB, which is providing us with grant funding to perform an international standard complete and rigorous environmental and social impact assessment for this exploration project, which included an analysis of water. Again, the chapter of the report on water runs to 130-something pages. The ESIA itself deals with biodiversity, noise, pollution, all sorts of things, and the ESIA itself runs to 941 pages, plus there are appendices having to do with environmental and social management plans, livelihood restoration plans, and so on and so forth. So I hope that listeners understand that it is entirely not the case that this is something where the project is ignoring the questions that people are asking. This is not at all the case. The questions that people are asking are actually being answered in a very thorough and rigorous fashion. That in itself does not mean that people will support the project, because it is your personal prerogative to support or not. But, this is actually the state of the matter and the actual case as we stand right now.
Okay. We do have another caller, maybe our final caller, because we strapped for time a wee bit. So let's take our final caller. I guess we lost that caller there. I'm noticing a question from someone via our WhatsApp, and this individual is asking, my concern is, what happened if the test is unsuccessful? What means is the use or the block, the holes, or whatever the direction he's going with that?
Right. So that's a great question. If the wells are not viable, the wells will simply be essentially abandoned, and that's a process of cementing the well and capping the well. So what you end up with on the surface is something that looks like a fire hydrant, a little bit larger than a fire hydrant. And that's it. If there is no steam underground that's viable in the first place, nothing is going to happen to the well, because it means there was no pressure in the well to begin with, right? So you'll just end up with an abandoned well on the surface of the ground.
Okay. Let's take our final caller. Caller, good morning. Welcome.
Hello, yes, good morning. Thank you so much for having me. I've been trying to get on for a while. I apologize if I missed some of the comments that were made. And I think it's quite appropriate to, in this evolving world, to look for alternative sources of energy. I have some questions, though. Number one, that will involve drilling into the earth. Now, just as we have the what's above the earth in a sort of ecosystem, homeostasis, so to speak, there is some sort of ecosystem, or if you want to call it that, underneath the earth. And are we concerned that this potential disruption can lead to make it easier for earthquakes and so on to happen? Number two, radon gas. I think that's one of the top, if not the second, cause of lung cancer in terms of the environmental issue. Are we concerned about that? It is odorless, and you can't see it either. So what are the concerns about that? And I think when you look at something that's been around for about 60 plus years, while it's encouraging that there's been a lot that's written about it and we have experience in it, or the world has experience in it, in the grand scheme of things, that's probably not a long enough lifetime to predict or to have a full sense of potential harmful effects. We looking back at the fossil energy and so on, when it was started, they probably were not aware of all the issue with the greenhouse effect and so on. So are we setting in motion things to sort of mitigate against such things happening, or are we just relying on it's been around for 60 plus years?
Thank you, caller. Thank you so much. And respond to the caller. Are we a bit strapped for time?
Interesting question. Let's just say quickly, earthquakes, there's no connection between earthquakes and what we are proposing to do. Earthquakes are a geologic phenomenon that operate on the basis of geologic time and geologic structures, which we actually have no control over. Earthquakes are going to happen when earthquakes happen. There has been a concern that drilling for geothermal energy can induce induce seismic activity, but this is only a concern if the type of geothermal drilling that is being done involves what is called fracking. which is pumping high pressure water into the rock to crack the rock to provide permeability, which is what oil and gas drillers in the United States and in some places do. And in some places in the world, some geothermal exploration projects have done that. We are not proposing to do anything of the sort because we think that we have an already permeable reservoir that does not require any permeability to be induced in it, so we're simply drilling a hole into it. Drilling a hole into the ground to a geothermal reservoir is not going to induce any seismic activity.
All right. Mr. Samuel, we get to that stage of the morning, hours just never enough to talk, of course, on this situation we'll be speaking of this morning, or the subject line, I should say. Any closing comment, anything we may have missed that should have brought up in this discussion this morning that we have missed, on any closing comments?
I'm sure we've missed a lot. We can talk about this for hours and still miss a few things. But one of the things I'd like people to understand is, yes, we understand that there are concerns about environmental issues and social issues. But I would simply wish to draw our attention back to Guadeloupe.
Yeah.
This power station is, what I would advise listeners to do is to Google buoyante in Guadeloupe or Google geothermal energy in Guadeloupe, and eventually you're going to come to a picture of the power station. And GT, you should do it yourself, and yes, what you're going to see is a waterfront location that looks quite similar to Queen's Park. There's a playing field there's a main road along the waterfront. The hills are right a few hundred meters away from the waterfront, and it's all a lovely, very lush Caribbean village sort of scenario.
Okay.
It looks very inviting. And in the middle of this is a 15 megawatt geothermal power station operating right now as we speak.
And it is working efficiently?
It is working beautifully to the point where they are planning to expand the installation, because it is in harmony with the environment, with the community, and the economy. So this is the point about geothermal energy I'd like people to understand. It is new to Grenada, but it is not new to the region. And even though there are risks involved in the exploration, there are uncertainties involved in the exploration. That essentially applies to practically anything that we may do. So the risks and uncertainties, we are approaching them in a structured and measured fashion. And buoyante in Guadeloupe is the example of what can happen in Grenada if we are successful. And, we thank the supporters of the project, the CDB, the other institutions that are financing and providing support. And we'll see. We're approaching this in a structured and rigorous fashion, and we appreciate the input, the feedback, and the comments from society and stakeholders as a whole.
All right. So, Samuel, I want to thank you so much, and of course, interesting conversation this morning, and I certainly hope as the project goes through, if there's any other information we need to share, we hope we can have you back on the show once there's a level of success that comes through with. Certainly we'd like to have you back on the show and we're able to discuss it as the way forward. Thank you once again, sir.
You're welcome.
All right. Hey, folks, that's how we take a wrap for today's edition of To The Point. Join us again for another edition, hopefully tomorrow, once the Almighty permits. Have yourself a great day. That's where I say goodbye.